They laughed when I said I didn't need anyone to be happy. They whispered when I showed up at family gatherings without a boyfriend. And they looked at me as if I were a failure, simply because I wasn't wearing a wedding ring at 33. But some responses don't need to be shouted. Some comebacks don't need to be announced. And today is the day they learn that the woman they looked down on for 7 years is the very one they will never forget. This is my story, Crystal's story. A tale of forbidden love, of collapse, and of a rebirth not meant for the faint of heart. If you've ever been made to feel not enough by family or by society, then this video is for you. Chapter 1. Still the same chair, still the same words. I still remember the feeling when I stepped into the community center that year. The smell of floor cleaner mixed with the staleness of leftover food. The scrape of plastic chairs against the tiles, and those fake half-hearted hugs. I had attended this family gathering 7 years in a row, and every single time it turned into a public humiliation. No one needed to say much, just one word from my grandmother, and the entire room would swivel toward me. Year after year, the same refrain. That year, I was 33. And she spoke again, her voice sharp and sour, a sound the family had long grown accustomed to. At your age, even the orphanage would reject you. And as if programmed, the chuckles rippled through the room. Not the kind of laughter born from something funny, but the kind that shielded people from becoming the next target of ridicule. I sat there, lips pressed into a faint smile, pretending not to hear. But inside, I was counting down. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, and Stephen would walk in. The ring in its velvet box was still tucked away in my car trunk. I knew everything was in place. The only question was, would I have the courage to go through with it? I glanced at my mother. She didn't look at me. She didn't laugh either. But her silence, it was worse. No defense, no protest, just a quiet nod as if she agreed with what had just been said. Then there was Mike, my cousin, who always delighted in mocking me, sipping his beer with the smug satisfaction of someone watching an old play he never grew tired of. Aunt Susan clicked her tongue, shook her head, feigning sympathy. But I knew better. The moment I turned my back, she'd be whispering, "She's still single again?" I used to leave these gatherings with a heavy heart, wondering if something really was wrong with me, whether my career, my independence, my little apartment, and my solo trips were worth the price of being the family's odd case. But this year was different. I had prepared, not just for today, for 7 long years. I pressed my lips together, breathed evenly, and answered my grandmother in a calm voice. "You always know just the right moment to speak, don't you?" To the untrained ear, it could have passed as a compliment. But I caught the sharp, knife-like look from Rachel, my younger cousin, the only one in the family with enough brains to read between the lines. She raised an eyebrow silently, asking Crystal, "What are you about to do?" I gave the slightest nod. Still sitting in the same old chair, but inside me everything had shifted. This time I hadn't come to endure. I had come to end it. Chapter 2. The Man I Once Let Go. I once thought I had forgotten Stephen. After all those years, I had been too busy to remember. Waking up early for work, collapsing onto the sofa at night with unread emails, eyelids too heavy to keep open. Sometimes an entire week passed without me speaking to anyone outside of colleagues. I had built myself a cage out of success and locked myself inside it. Stephen wasn't in the photos I posted online. He wasn't present in my work presentations. He wasn't there at company parties where I raised my glass alone, smiling just enough so no one would pry into my personal life. But he was still there. In the silences, in the nights I fell asleep with the lights still on, in the moments I stepped into a spotless yet icy apartment after a long day and realized no one was waiting for me, in the crack of a beer can, opened half drunk, then abandoned, in the phone that never rang unless it was work. I can't recall exactly when I last felt loved, but I remember very clearly the last time I refused it. I was 26. Everything was just beginning. My career, my love, my dream of a small life with the man I had chosen. Stephen was a mechanic, a man who worked with his hands, with eyes that never wavered, and a smile strong enough to strip away all my burdens. He loved me in the simplest way and the truest way. But I chose my family. I chose to keep peace with my grandmother instead of keeping him. I chose silence when she called him a cheap grease monkey. I chose to stand still at the engagement party when she declared, before the crowd, Crystal shouldn't marry a man like that. She deserves better options. And Stephen quietly walked away. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He didn't accuse. He simply turned, stepped out of the kitchen, where we had once dreamed of our future, and disappeared from my life. I told everyone it was because we weren't compatible, that I needed to focus on my career, that I wasn't ready for marriage. But the truth was, I was a coward. I feared my family's scorn. I feared living a life unapproved by my grandmother, the woman who held absolute power in our family, even though no one had ever chosen her to. And then 7 years passed. I stumbled from one awkward relationship to another hollow date. Polite, successful men who never once made my heart skip a beat. They were good men. But they weren't Stephen. I once thought giving him up was necessary to grow up. But each year when I stepped into that room where my grandmother waited with her judging eyes, I felt like a child being punished for daring to follow her heart. And this year, I no longer wanted to be that child. I texted Stephen 3 weeks before the family gathering. A short message. If you still remember me, I have a proposal. I expected nothing. But he replied, just one line. I've been waiting 7 years for those words. Chapter 3. The Unannounced Reunion. I thought I was ready to see Stephen again. Truly I did. I'd rehearsed my opening lines in my head dozens of times. I had imagined every version, gentle, cool, casual, even slightly playful, something like long time no see. You look good. But fate had no patience for my preparations. That day, after a long presentation at work, I stopped by Morrison's Coffee, as usual, the go-to spot for office regulars. I had just bent down to pick up a stack of files that had slipped from my bag when a voice cut through the air, chilling me to the bone. Crystal, I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Stephen was standing there, and he looked nothing like the memories I had clung to. He was no longer the young man in a faded t-shirt, hands stained with grease eyes, gazing at me as if I were his entire sky. In front of me now was a grown man. A perfectly tailored gray suit, hair neatly cropped, the sharp gaze of someone who had built an empire from the ashes. But still the same eyes, deep brown, gentle, disarmingly honest. I forced a smile. You look so different. He bent down, gathering my scattered documents. 7 years is long enough for people to change. I wanted to ask something more, but my throat felt caught as if words were lodged there. So instead I silently walked inside with him. We sat at the familiar corner table that had once been our spot. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar. I hadn't even spoken when he turned to the barista and said, "A cappuccino with just a touch of cinnamon." I froze. After all these years, he still remembered exactly how I liked my coffee. "Have you been keeping tabs on me?" I half joked, half serious. Stephen chuckled. "No, but I always remember the little things, because I know you're the kind of person who would leave someone not because they did something big and unforgivable, but because they ignored the small details." I fell silent. The air between us wasn't awkward exactly. It was more like two strangers trying to rediscover an old language. The words were out of rhythm, but the emotions remained untouched, as if that heartbreaking night had never happened, as if that cold farewell had never been spoken. "Do you know what I used to think every time I passed by your old garage?" I asked. He shook his head. I looked straight into his eyes. That, if only I'd had the courage not to walk away that day. Stephen held my gaze for a long time. Then slowly he smiled. "I once thought that if we ever met again, I'd resent you. But now, seeing you like this, all I feel is regret for the both of us. Because if we had one more chance, tell me, this time, would you choose me? I didn't answer. It wasn't time yet. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This reunion wasn't a coincidence. It was the first step in a return that would silence my entire family. Chapter 4. Planning to return. What was taken after that meeting at the coffee shop, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. Not out of fear, but because in my head everything was starting to fall into place. Every word my grandmother had ever thrown at me, every pitying look from relatives, every moment I had to pretend I was fine. They all came flooding back. But this time, I didn't feel weak. I felt angry. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about giving it back. Giving back the humiliation they had wrapped up as a gift at every family gathering. Giving back the insults disguised as concern and care. Giving back the way my mother's eyes had once slid away from me as if I were a stain on the family. Stephen understood that. He didn't need a long explanation. Just one simple message from him: I still have the invitation for this year's reunion. That was enough. We began to meet more often, at first in coffee shops, later at Stephen's apartment, and that left me stunned. A penthouse overlooking the river, minimalist, expensive interior design, a walnut wood table, an abstract painting hanging slightly off-center, careless yet perfect. I realized he had truly become someone, and I also realized he didn't need me anymore. But he still chose to stand by me, not out of need, but out of want. And that made my heart tremble in a strange way. We started planning, step by step, meticulously, like 2 architects constructing a play where no audience could tell what was staged and what was real. Stephen suggested I'll come to the reunion, but not just as the ex who came back. I'll be your fiancé. I widened my eyes. Are you insane? He tilted his head with a sly smile. You want to put your grandmother in her place, don't you? Then don't go halfway. Let her think you're not only back with the man she once despised, but about to marry him. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then I nodded. But there has to be a ring. I said, half joking, half serious. Stephen's eyes locked on mine, more serious than ever. I know. From that moment, everything unfolded like a campaign. We practiced how Stephen would walk in at the exact moment my grandmother was making one of her cutting declarations. How he would stride over calm, confident, and slip the ring on my finger in front of everyone. I rehearsed every answer to the questions that would surely come. When did you 2 get back together? What does Stephen do now? When's the wedding? Every reply had to be natural, convincing, not to deceive, but to teach them a lesson. I took notes on every relative's reactions in past years. Stephen listened, analyzing them like a behavioral expert. Uncle Pete will diffuse the tension with some dumb joke. Your mother, she'll cry. But whether it's tears of joy or shame, that depends. And your grandmother, she won't believe her eyes. We laughed. But inside I wasn't laughing. I only felt relief, because finally I no longer felt powerless. Finally, I was in control of my own story. Chapter 5. The ring, the role in the things I dare not name. Choosing a ring was never on the list of things I thought I'd do again with Stephen. And yet one Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting in a high-end jewelry store, golden lights reflecting off the glass display, with Stephen across from me, the same man my family once branded a man with no future, now deciding between 2 diamonds. He tilted his head, asking me, "What do you think princess cut or would oval suit you better?" I laughed. "You're choosing like it's real?" Stephen simply looked at me, speaking slowly. "Because my feelings are real." I didn't respond. I couldn't. We chose a ring that made me lose my breath the moment I tried it on. 10 carats, a thin band, the stone glittering like a declaration I've returned and brighter than ever. Stephen paid without blinking, and it struck me while I was still struggling to please the world he had quietly built one where he didn't need anyone's permission. But the hardest part wasn't the ring. It was the role. From the moment we began planning, I thought of this as a game, a spectacular act of defiance, a chance to make my grandmother, the woman who shattered me at 26, face her own mistake. But the more we rehearsed, the more time I spent with Stephen, the more afraid I became. Not afraid the plan would fail, afraid of myself, afraid that I was no longer acting. We practiced every gesture, how Stephen would steady my hand as we walked in, how I would look at him as if we were truly in love. But then I realized, somewhere along the way, that look was no longer an act. I remember one evening after Stephen walked me home, we stood in the hallway, silent. He asked if you hadn't left back then. Do you think we would have made it this far? I didn't know how to answer, because maybe we would have stayed together, but maybe that wound was exactly what pushed us to become better versions of ourselves. I said, I don't know. But I do know one thing. Without you, I wouldn't have been strong enough to survive these past 7 years. Stephen stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. And now, are you strong enough to stop living for others? I didn't reply. But I knew this much, this return I wasn't bringing just a ring, a beautiful dress, or a successful man. I was bringing myself the self strong enough to face everyone who once made me fall and still stand tall. Chapter 6, The Day of My Life. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because of an alarm, but because my heart was pounding as if it had been waiting for this day for 7 years. Even in sleep, I still saw my grandmother, still heard her words. At your age, even the orphanage wouldn't take you. But today, I wasn't the granddaughter sitting silently through humiliation anymore. Today, I was the one rewriting the game. I brewed coffee in silence. Everything in my apartment seemed to move in slow motion. The navy blue dress I had hung out the night before the ring resting in its velvet box, the first rays of morning sunlight streaming in, like a reminder, it's time. Stephen picked me up in a red convertible Mustang. Bold, classic, impossible to ignore, just like our plan. We arrived an hour early. I helped my mother set the table, arrange the food, slip a few lavender stems into a glass jar. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation, from the thrill of history about to be made. My mother glanced at me, tilting her head. You look different today. I only smiled. I feel different too. And then my grandmother arrived. As always, 20 minutes after everyone else, late enough to command attention, but early enough to maintain her dignity as the family's most important elder. She wore a navy dress, her old string of pearls, and entered like a queen. Her eyes swept across the room, assessing, then landed on me. Crystal still no ring, laughter rippled through the room. A yearly ritual, a tired performance repeated over and over. I sat still, waiting for the cue, and then the doors swung open. Stephen walked in like a scene from a film. Light poured in behind him, freezing the entire room in place. Charcoal gray suit, dark tie, those familiar brown eyes. Everything about him was perfect, almost frighteningly so. Sorry I'm late, love. Traffic was awful. The word love rang out clear. Every head turned to me. He walked straight over, opened the box, and like a spell we had rehearsed 100 times, slid the ring onto my finger. No explanation. Only that tender look, the kiss on my cheek, warm enough to soften, deliberate enough to suggest everything. The room went silent. Then 1 second later, like a switch had been flipped, the whispers erupted. Questions, gasps, eyes wide with shock. My grandmother was mute. She stared at me, then at Stephen, then at the dazzling ring on my hand with eyes stripped of arrogance, replaced by something else entirely, disbelief. Stephen Martinez? Isn't he that mechanic boy? Stephen stepped forward, so courteous that her scorn shrank into insignificance. Yes, that's me. But now I run a chain of luxury garages across 3 states. And your granddaughter, Mrs. Morrison, is the woman I've chosen to spend the rest of my life with. I swear in that moment the whole room could hear nothing but the sound of collapse. the collapse of prejudice, of a list of toxic expectations, and of the throne my grandmother once believed she could sit on forever unshaken. Chapter 7, When the Truth Spoke Quietly. I don't remember who spoke first. Maybe it was Uncle Pete with his, "This guy looks familiar," or perhaps it was my cousin Rachel who nearly shouted, "Oh my God, it really is Stephen." But I remember clearly the look in my grandmother's eyes. She looked at the ring, at Stephen, then at me as if she were trying to verify the reality around her. And I was unnervingly calm. After years of humiliation today, I didn't have to bow my head. Today I lifted it high, meeting every gaze in the room without needing to explain a single thing. "We've been engaged for 2 weeks," I said, my voice gentle yet firm. "We just wanted to keep it a secret until this special day." A small ripple of OS spread across the room. A few people even clapped. My mother sat silently, eyes glistening with tears. I didn't know if they were from joy, regret, or simply shock. Then Stephen stepped forward, turning to face my grandmother. I know I wasn't the ideal choice back then, but thanks to you, I had the motivation to become who I am today. He gave a small bow. Not fake, not mocking, just enough to make her listen. "Thank you for underestimating me, because without that disdain, I might never have had the drive to build my own chain of garages." I watched her face change color. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times, but I never thought, when it finally happened, I would feel so steady. One by one, relatives came to speak to us. Some offered awkward apologies. Others tried to twist the story into something like, "I always knew you two were meant for each other. I didn't blame them. They hadn't been the ones holding the knife first. They were just the chorus clapping when the prey was wounded, and the first to toss flowers when it rose victorious." Stephen squeezed my hand gently. I turned to him. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" He nodded. "It's not just revenge, Crystal. You're reclaiming the place that should have been yours all along." My grandmother stood. She said nothing. Walked toward the door, then stopped her back still to me. "If you're happy, then I'm glad." No glance back. No handshake. But it was the first time she hadn't used her words to make me feel less than enough. And to me, that was the greatest victory. Chapter 8. No longer needing to be accepted. I still remember the feeling of that afternoon. Not the explosive satisfaction I once imagined, but a quiet peace seeping into every breath. The revenge plan Stephen and I had crafted had worked a return so flawless, it felt like we were acting in a film. But what I hadn't anticipated was that what I regained wasn't just my dignity. It was myself. After the public proposal, the family gradually dispersed. Some patted my shoulder, some avoided my eyes. Even those who had once laughed loudest at me now tried to act friendly, as if nothing had ever happened. I didn't blame them, but I didn't need them anymore. My mother came to me. She didn't say much, only gripped my hand. "Longer than usual. I know I didn't protect you, and I'm sorry." I heard the truth in her voice. No more excuses like "you don't understand how hard it was for me," or "that's just how family is." For the first time, she took responsibility. And for the first time, I didn't need her approval to feel complete. That night, Stephen and I didn't go home right away. We sat in the parking lot behind the community center. Car doors opened, the chirp of crickets, cool night air, and a sky scattered with stars, peaceful beyond belief. "Do you think we went too far?" I asked. He chuckled softly. "No. I think you finally dared to live as yourself." I rested my head on his shoulder. Silence stretched for a long while. I spent 7 years trying to prove I didn't need anyone. But today, for the first time, I feel like I don't need to prove anything at all. That was the truth. No victory could be greater than the fact that I was no longer imprisoned by anyone's expectations. No longer needing acceptance, no longer needing to be praised as so strong, so accomplished. I am me, and I choose happiness not as a prize, but as a birthright I once refused to claim. Chapter 9. I chose myself. A week after the family gathering, I received an unexpected call from Uncle Pete. "Crystal, I just wanted to say, you did really well. I should have said that a long time ago." I thanked him, then hung up, my heart lighter than air. Not because of the compliment, but because I no longer needed it. Recognition from my family, the very thing I once craved like oxygen, had now become something nice to have, but not necessary. I didn't need anyone else to confirm that I was right. I had already confirmed it for myself. Stephen and I didn't rush. Even though we had pretended to be engaged, we didn't immediately fall back into being lovers like before. "Are you sure you want to try again?" he asked me one rainy afternoon as we sat in his small kitchen cooking dinner and listening to jazz. I looked at him, no longer the poor student he once was, and not the perfect man everyone used to scorn for being not enough, but a man who had walked through storms and chosen to grow without choosing bitterness. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try this time for me, not to please anyone else." We began again, not from the very start, but from the exact place we had lost each other in the middle of choices made for others. I also went to see Dr. Williams, the therapist, who had patiently walked beside me through those long, lonely years. "I think I've forgiven," I said. "For them?" she asked. "No. For myself. For letting them define me for so long. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean reconciling with everyone in the family. It meant stopping the punishment of myself for the mistakes I once allowed others to inflict on me. In the end, what I learned wasn't how sweet revenge can taste. It was this: I don't need to become someone else to deserve happiness. I just need to return to myself whole enough and without asking anyone's permission. They once told me I would be alone forever if I didn't live the way they wanted. But now they are the very ones who must witness me happy, in my own way. This isn't just revenge. This is the journey of reclaiming my own voice. And if you're in the dark right now, judged for your personal choices, remember this: you don't need permission to be free. You only need the courage to choose yourself. Thank you for staying with my story until the very end. If you love journeys of revenge, healing, and awakening like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Scarlet Vows. I'll see you in the next video, where old wounds become new strength.